About 5 years ago, I was doing a similar job to what I'm doing today. So basically my brief is to come and talk to you about how the world of automotive is changing and how to ensure the dealership model remains competitive. And I remember about 5 years ago, I was given a very similar brief, but it was in the food packaging industry, and it was down in Texas. And so I headed down to Texas, and it was a much smaller meeting than this. So it was less than maybe 25 people in the room. And they were the CEOs and the CMOs and the market presidents of the 5 largest grocery retailers in America. So you're thinking Target, Kroger, Safeway, Walmart. And it was hosted by a large food company. And the reason they were in the room, it was an emergency strategic meeting because those 5 companies had lost 35% of their market value in 45 days. That's $21 billion. Now, clearly I'm not from around here, but I understand if you steal a car in America, you go to jail. You wipe $21 billion worth of enterprise value off 5 of the largest companies in the world, and you get to have an emergency strategic meeting with me. There's something wrong with that disincentive, wouldn't you say? Hey guys, can we put the house lights back up? Would that be all right? And does anyone remember, by the way, what happened in the middle of 2017 that led to that level of value destruction in grocery retailer here in the US? Does anyone remember what happened? Amazon bought Whole Foods. So we run a day and we got the whole day. We have a whole bunch of discussion about trends and consumer shifts and omni-channel world and online, digital, all that sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, I said to the CMO of a $60 billion company, what is your basic conclusion about what happened and the Amazon disruption, et cetera? And she said to me, quote, all I know is you can't hold us responsible because we never saw it coming. I was like, were you asleep at the wheel? What do you mean you never saw it coming? You didn't think Amazon were going to compete and go after food at some point? And so I didn't say any of that, by the way, because I want to get invited back to next year's emergency strategic meeting. So I was like, well, that's a really interesting perspective. But I'm on my way to DFW. I start texting with an analyst in our Denver, Colorado office. I'm like, hey, John, I'm going to suspend all your client responsibilities for 3 months. And I want you to dive into all of the trends that have been happening around grocery retail and tell me if that's a reasonable response. I'm like, it shouldn't take you 12 weeks, but maybe it'll take you 8, whatever, just have at it, nothing but that. 13 minutes later, he starts blowing my phone up with a bunch of text messages about indicators around how that business was changing that chief marketing officer should have been aware of. And so I put him on a slide for you this morning, right? So don't forget, this is 2017. So his first text is 2016, Amazon releases their own food brand, Wickedly Prime. It's not vertical integration, but it's white labeling, but it's a pretty good indication that they're taking the market serious. Would that be a fair statement? That same year, they launched the Amazon Go grocery store. I don't know if you've been to Newark Airport lately, but have you seen those new Hudson stores that have no humans in them? You just walk out using RFID and other near-field communications tech. That started there in 2016. There's 2,500 of these things getting built, right? 2 years before that, the Grocery Marketers Association, so that would be like the ADA for you, right? In their monthly publication, runs a front cover headline saying, don't freak out, but Amazon are going to get into food and they're going to get into it seriously. We'll figure it out, but it's coming. But in case 2 years is not enough notice, 10 years before, they launched their direct-to-consumer business. It's in 35 US states. Now, I don't know if any of you own Amazon stock and follow analyst briefings, but every year since they got into the food business, an analyst has said every year, if Amazon could just get that little bit closer to the consumer, the last mile challenge, they'd be unstoppable in grocery retail. Question, when you're a $1 trillion company, how do you solve the last mile challenge? By anyone you want. Literally, with the exception of Walmart, they could have taken down anyone. 11 years before they start selling food, 18 years before that, they buy 35% of an online direct fresh food company. Would it be fair to say there was some signal in the noise, yes or no? But don't hold me responsible, I never saw it coming. Now, right now we're talking about the grocery business, so it's not very threatening. At some point in this conversation, we're going to talk about the automotive business and how it's changing, what that looks like. But before I do, I want to dissect this, and then I want to compare it to a different organizational response. So think about the size of these companies. Some of these companies are $300-400 billion businesses. Do you think they had access to enough data and insights and reports about how the consumer is changing? Do you reckon they had access to enough reports, yes or no? And even if they didn't, they could have just got on Google and got all the answers they wanted anyway, right? They have like dedicated departments to strategy. That CMO I was talking to probably makes $3 million a year base, right? And yet somehow they were unwilling to accept the changing reality. And it wasn't because they didn't have access to information, and it wasn't because they didn't have access to capital. They had everything they needed to respond, including the brand and the relationship and the reputation and the connection to the consumer itself. Do you know, 2 of those companies have not recovered that value that they lost, even though COVID has been the single greatest gift to the grocery business in history. Not so bad for the car business either, by the way, but we'll come back to that in a sec. So park that. Here's what I'm basically getting at. It wasn't that they didn't know what was happening, that they just weren't prepared to accept what was happening. Second example, on the positive side. I want you to imagine it's January 1, 2010, and I'm your financial advisor. I'm not, so this comes with whatever SEC and FINRA disclosure it needs. But I want you to imagine that I can get you in a time machine from today, December 2022, take you back to January 1, 2010, and let you bet your life savings on any one company you want, but you know everything you know today. And I say you can buy Amazon stock, you can buy Netflix, you can buy Tesla, you can buy Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, or Domino's Pizza. Where would you put your money? Domino's Pizza would have been the answer. You would have got, that was like totally a setup, right? If you held that stock for 7 years, you would have got a 21x return. If you held it for 10, you would have got a 131x return on that money. That's a greater return than all of those FANGs that everyone raves about put together. And the reason it's shocking is there's no reason fast food should have grown as much as it did, because it hasn't grown in terms of consumption. People aren't eating that much more pizza. Not only that, but Domino's was already the second largest player in a very consolidated, rolled up field. All the sophisticated capital, all the money had made its way in. It's, you know, you're in a price competitive business, it's a really price competitive. You can do that pizza for $7.99. I'll do it for $6.99. I'll give you 44 gallons of Coke to wash it down. I mean, it's like, and what are the barriers to entry? An Uber account and an oven. And the second largest player in a highly saturated business with negative macroeconomic trends facing it grew 131 times in 10 years. It's an unbelievable example. And it's because, it's not because of market conditions, it's because unlike the CMO example I just shared, it was leaders in that business acknowledging the changing reality and doing something about it. In fact, I would say specifically, it was Patrick Doyle who was leading the business. He gets, do you guys remember this? He gets a job at Domino's. He'd come up through the business as an operator. Like, same in automotive, like people start on the floor and they work their way up. That's his story. He gets the CEO job after 20 odd years. And the first thing he does is he runs a public campaign apologizing to customers about how bad pizza has gotten. Do you guys remember this? He's like, this stuff is disgusting. Crust tastes like cardboard. He publicly admitted that they started using a chemical reconstituted substance that looked like, smelt like, tasted like cheese, but had absolutely no origin in dairy whatsoever. Inside story. The night before they run that campaign, he calls the head of Crisp and Porter, who did the creative work, and he's freaking out. He's like, I've been in this job 2 months. I'm about to make the highest risk ad campaign of all time. I'm probably gonna get fired by the board. Pull the pin. Let's do something more conservative. The head of Crisp and Porter's like, dude, this is programmatic advertising. You needed to tell me that 6 weeks ago. You basically peed in a swimming pool and you're never getting it back. And so all these things hit YouTube, goes viral. It turns out to be one of the most successful social media campaigns of all time. But while he's having this truth-telling session outside, he's having a truth-telling session inside. And he's running meetings with his internal team, and here's what he basically said. We have to accept the fact that the way the consumer buys is not picking up the phone, waiting for us to answer, verbally telling us what they want. They want to be able to literally think pizza and have us deliver their favorite to their door. This business is no longer a food business. Now, this is 2010. This business is no longer a food business. We are a technology company, and we happen to deliver food. And so over the course of 10 years, you know this, particularly if you've got kids, this is the dominant, by the way, this is one of the top 15 most valuable brands for millennials and Gen Z in America. Like, they've just totally turned it around. And they got pretty good. At one point, you could tweet, hey, Domino's, I'm hungry. They would cross-reference your Twitter account to their internal CRM and activate your favorite order. Turns out to be a stupid idea because a whole bunch of people got pizza they didn't actually want. But it shows what's possible. You walk past Amazon, Alexa in your house, say, hey, Alexa, launch Domino's. Say, Domino's, I'll take my usual. That's the total friction required to solve their problem. In fact, some of you know, certain OEMs have put that technology for Domino's in their apps, in their cars. And you can just, you're coming back from soccer on a Saturday, you hit that button, hey, Domino's, I'll take my usual by the time you get home. Kids got their pizza, stick them in front of the television and get a life. Like basically, they have made it the least friction omni-channel experience possible. And despite already being the largest player in a consolidated business that wasn't growing very quickly, they grew 131x. So let's bring this down, like let's bring this back to us, right? Here's one example, and it doesn't matter that they were large organizations or not, it's irrelevant on size. You have one group of leaders in complete denial about how their market's changing, and then when they get their backsides handed to them, they're like, don't hold us responsible, we never saw it coming. And you got another example of a leader, or a leadership team, I would say, who are like, hey, the world's changing, but if we get ahead of this thing, we have an opportunity to lead that consumer to the future and ride the wave rather than become victims to the external shift. And so that's what I want to unpack. What is the difference between A and B? And basically, here's what I think it kind of ultimately sort of shakes down as. I think it's the understanding that change is not about strategy. It's not about having more money. It's not about investing huge amounts of things, throwing a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. The number one difference between A and B is psychology. Does that make sense? Guys, can we bring my mic down? It's running real hot. We're getting a bit of feedback up here. It's psychological difference rather than like who's got the most money or who's got the best strategy. Does that make sense? In other words, it's the top, what, we've got 100 people here? Your ability to maintain your competitiveness in the automotive space and to ensure the dealership model remains the model of the future, because there are OEMs testing direct and there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff right now. We're protected by regulation, but who says that's going to stay for the rest of the next 30 years? You've got drivetrain, all sorts of stuff. We'll unpack that in a second. Your ability to navigate that world and continue to dominate and have the success you have will come down to the psychology and the willingness to accept that change of the people in this room. And so the question is, what is that journey like? What do you do? In our experience, there's three things. One, you build a culture where people are brutally honest with themselves and each other about what's changing and what that means for them. They don't just sort of ride it out. They don't confuse their awareness of change with truly accepting change. Two, this is the hardest one. They put tension on their own system, their own organization, their own business, their own culture, the way they sell, the way they service, the way they collaborate in the deal. They put pressure on themselves before the market makes them change. Because let's be clear, the last 2 years in automotive have been the two most profitable years in history. That's across most OEM brands, and for most, actually, the OEMs haven't done that great because they haven't been able to move the product, but your margins have been through the roof because of the inventory constraints and the supply chain issues. So you could be forgiven for saying, hey, like Julian, Barry, why the heck are we having a session on change? We're crushing it right now. When would you rather begin to change the way you practice, change the way you deliver the customer experience, change the way you employ and grow the talent inside of your dealerships? When would you rather do that? When your back's to the wall, your margins are squeezed, volume's down, OEMs are frustrated, the board's all over the management team, staff are leaving left, right, and center. Would you rather do it then? That's what we call a burning platform. Or would you rather do it when your margins are strong, staff turnover is the lowest it's been in 20 years. Customers are more forgiving than they've ever been because they know they can't get anything anywhere anyway. When would you rather begin to change? We call that like from a place of strength, like a burning ambition. It's a stupid question, I know. I don't actually need you to answer it, right? Way easier practically to change then, except there's this great belief. It's what's that American saying? Don't fix what isn't. That's the dumbest piece of advice ever given. Fix what ain't broke before it's forced upon you, because then you get to control it, you get to influence it, and you got more time to screw it up and do the learning of what the new model, what the dealership of the future looks like, the customer experience looks like. You start that early rather than wait till the world moves ahead or regulation changes, whether it be around drivetrain or around the role of dealerships and licensing, and you get ahead of that curve. And then three, you move from a place of being in agreement to a place of alignment. Let me explain. Have you ever sat with your teams and you sort of, hey, we're really focused on the customer experience right now, or we really want to improve collaboration between service and sales, or whatever the ask is. And everyone sits around the table and like, totally boss, yeah, I'm all about it, no worries. 90 days later, you look back and no one's changed a damn thing. Have you ever had an experience like that? Any of you got teenage kids, for instance, right? Like, that's because you had their agreement, you didn't have their alignment. Behavior change is the final frontier. So what I thought we'd do is we'd unpack these three things. And after I do each of them, I'm going to give you a chance to have a discussion, because I can talk at this pace for about 7 days, all right? But it'd be better if you sort of stopped and went, hey, what does this really mean for me and my role, whether you're head of sales, whether you're running the dealership, maybe you're the controller, whatever your role is, to sit back and actually reflect, what does this mean for the way you create the employee experience, the way you create the customer experience, for the way your dealership competes with others and stuff in the area. So we're gonna have a bit of discussion and workshopping around this stuff. So let's start with the first idea. I've already spent the first 20 minutes setting this up. Don't confuse awareness with change with acceptance and taking ownership for leading your response, okay? The basic observation here is that it's harder to move from awareness to acceptance than it is to execute the strategy. So let's drop this down into dealership land, right? I'm not an expert in the automotive industry. Yes, I do some work with OEMs. I have worked with actually hundreds of dealers, but it's not my industry's transformation. I don't really care what the vertical is, right? But I tried to put a summary together of what I thought was sort of the current landscape for automotive. So just bear with me for a second. Obviously, the supply chain issues are a real problem. It's probably going to take 24 months for that stuff to work through the systems. I know it's frustrating, and some days you want to yell at the OEMs, but I'm telling you, no one wakes up at any of their HQs or any of their manufacturing sites going, how do we screw our dealers today and not give them any stock, right? It's not, the throughput's not, I mean, they're hurting more than you are around that stuff. So that sucks, but it's every industry across the world right now, let me tell you. I ordered a coffee table in May. It comes next February. I tried to order a dishwasher last January, and they said you'll get it in October 2023. You're actually doing better than most industries when it comes to this supply chain stuff. Environmental sustainability, governance, obviously huge stuff happening in your industry here. You've got 3 states, I think New York's one of them, right, who are demanding, 50% electric by 2035. It's nuts, right? Probably question whether that's even technically possible, but no one bothers to think about that when they set policy, right? So clear push, but it's not just regulatory, it's also driven by values in the marketplace as well and what people want. Skill shortages, they call this the war for talent. Have you heard that saying before? The war for labor, the war for skills, the war for talent. In my opinion, the war for talent is over. Talent won. And I think this might be the biggest challenge dealers will face moving forward, is how do you create a work environment and a culture and a brand that attracts the best talent? And I'll tell you why that matters. In a world where direct is possible, the number one advantage a dealer has is the intimacy and the relationship it has with the consumer. Would that be a fair statement? Okay, who creates that intimacy? We do, the team, the people. Which means if we don't have the best people engaging for the lifetime of that customer, not just the transaction, collaborating with the other parts of the dealership experience, then we won't actually have a differentiated offer, right? And therefore it comes back to the employee experience, and it sucks because most of us grew up the hard way where we walked, we started at the bottom, worked our way up, we're grateful for a job, right? And now we've got a whole generation coming in going, I'll have your job, thanks, in 4 months, but do you mind if I take every second day off on the way and I don't work Saturdays, right? And even sort of we've got a little bit of an emotional response to that one. Well, we're gonna drop into that one today too, right? So we know that's going on, and obviously the market's flattening out, interest rates are up. There's probably some pent-up demand to work its way through, but we're definitely not in the frenzy we were in the last 18 months. Huge drive chain shifts happening, the regulatory stuff, non-traditional competitors. Someone just built Carvana just built a tower 10 blocks from my house. It looks like a vending machine for cars, like crazy stuff. And meanwhile, you're seeing dealers consolidating, big IPOs and so public capital in there. And at the same time, your OEMs are adding a model for every segment humanly possible. Like what you have to know to be able to even represent a brand today's gone nuts. And those customers you sell want everything to be like Amazon. Simple, easy, fast, transparent, visible. Not only that, but they can't go to the toilet without telling 7 of their friends, right? So the ability to keep us accountable for the quality of that experience is pretty interesting. So very influential, and they've got different ownership. So I don't know what the stats are. I actually haven't done a sentiment study in the US, but license registrations for people under 25 in the UK, which by the way is a very strong car culture, are 40% down compared to one generation before. Kids don't even get their license because they don't even. The concept of owning is not a necessary concept. You've seen, like, I know you guys represent Porsche. Porsche are trialing their monthly rental, where you basically pick the vehicle you like. You get 3 or 4 tiers. I know Cadillac's tried something similar in Atlanta. So you're seeing different models of ownership and values around it. And I know COVID's changed a lot of this. But the question is it temporarily or not? I don't know if you remember, Accenture did that massive study, 300,000 car buyers here in the US, and asked them how they felt about the dealership experience. You guys remember this study? 87% of consumers said they hope they didn't ever have to go back and do it again. Like, as an industry, we're not crushing this thing, right? Now, I know obviously you have higher values and higher standards at Solar, but there's definitely an appetite for things to change. Would that be a fair statement? Okay, cool.